Welcome to the Evolution Partners podcast, where I talk with the world's leading thinkers, planners and doers who are helping to build great companies in their own way. We learn how the work they're doing is creating an impact and get to know a little bit more about them and what makes them tick. This episode is brought to you by Evolution Partners, where we help leaders to confidently build enduring great companies using our proven, structured, strategic planning process that ensures you build and execute the right plan. Check us out at evolutionpartners.com.au. Also, you can check out our books, Made to Thrive, outlining how to be a great CEO, as well as Onboarded, which is about making your new hires more effective faster. Shivani Gupta is an entrepreneur, business coach, author and speaker. She's owned and scaled several businesses, and she's worked with over 250 companies to help them nurture their most valuable asset, their people. Shivani believes that engaging talent will be the differentiator in business, as we're in the talent economy. Shivani works with business leaders and owners on engaging talent. With over 30 years of corporate and business experience, she's presented to over 250,000 people across 19 countries, coaching more than 1,500 leaders globally. She's authored 8 books, including her latest, Getting Your People to Step Up. Shivani has also scaled numerous businesses to over $1 million and recently exited a venture she nurtured from $0 to $5 million. Shivani, thanks for joining me today.
It's lovely to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Well, I'm glad to have a chat with you. We first met, I guess, we met meaningfully through EO last year. We'd kind of been on each other's radars a little bit before that. Maybe tell me about your journey in EO, just to start completely off the cuff. How long were you in EO? What's EO meant for you in your life?
Yeah, well, it's coming up to 9 years next month that I've been in EO, and it's been a very, very positive journey for me. When I look at my journey in EO, I realise that particularly scaling and then also learning how to exit a business, which is very different to starting a business, there's no way I would have had that success. I can really attribute most of that to EO and obviously to my family and friends and the support that exists as well. People call EO different things. For me, it's a learning organisation. And so to be surrounded by other people that are not only, willing to learn alongside of you, but are happy to then share their learnings and their experiences with me. And, I'm one of those nerds, Brad, that writes lots of notes and sits there and looks at my notes over and over again. We have a thing called Forum, which is like a mastermind in EO. And to be able to take my challenges and the things that I'm really struggling with vulnerably and openly into that and talk to people about it that have got similar values has been incredible for me. And I think I'll be in it for a long time to come. And I just wish I'd joined it 20 years ago when I sort of started my first venture. That would have really helped me kickstart it better.
Awesome. Well, I apologise. I didn't explain what EO is an acronym for. So maybe you could give us the acronym and the one-sentence description.
Yeah, absolutely. So EO stands for Entrepreneurs Organisation, and it's really a not-for-profit that's globally. It's got over 200 chapters in different cities all around the world, and it brings like-minded entrepreneurs that are running a business with a minimum turnover of $1 million US, who have to be a founder or co-founder in that business. And they're really there bringing some of those challenges, whether those challenges are their business, their personal or their family, and they're bringing some of those areas into that and looking at where they can learn and grow in each one or a specific area of their life.
Beautiful, thank you. EO.org, I think, is the address. Check it out if you're interested and an entrepreneur. It's certainly been huge in my life. Speaking about entrepreneurs, I'd like to begin by talking about Shoshin. In my experience, this concept from Zen Buddhism has been extremely impactful for entrepreneurs and leaders. And it features heavily in your book as a key to growth. I can just see between the lines how much that has impacted you. Please explain why Shoshin is so important for leaders to consider how it's changed your perspective and how leaders can use this to become more effective.
Yeah, absolutely, Brad. We've just been speaking about EO. I actually came across this concept in EO. I was actually at one of the trainings that they offer, and my mind was all over the place. And I remember this particular presenter speaking about Shoshin, and then it struck me. It's about having an open mind. It's about having that curious mindset. And I thought, wow, here am I learning about this particular concept, but in my brain I knew that I was not very open at all. And so it's about coming into something where you don't come in with any assumptions, you come in with a curious and openness to say, let me not assume that I know this, or let me not assume that I have the answers of that. So you leave all your, any preconceptions that you have behind. And Shoshin to me really means not only an open mind, but also an open heart. And so I believe that when you combine your heart and your mind, and if both can be open, we start to create some really great things, because we can look at ideas from a very different perspective, whether it's our team that's bringing it up, whether it's our partner at home that's bringing it up, or our children. So for me, it also fosters a lot of that continuous learning. So we don't come into that saying, I know that. You're always coming into that saying, even if I've read that book, even if I've encountered that issue, I'm actually coming into it wanting to learn, or maybe relearn for that. The other big learning I've had around Shoshin, and that I talk about that, with people I come across, is that it also asks you to park your ego at the door. And when we're successful, and I know you're very successful at what you do, we want to have a healthy sense of ego. We want to have an ego that drives us to be successful, but we don't want it running the show. And so when it comes to Shoshin, one of the things I've recognised is that really, in order for me to be my best, and yes, I can come in with confidence, but the best thing is that I do actually park my ego at the door, because that'll help me get better at problem solving. That'll help me also connect with people better in terms of what they do as well.
And was that George out of Malaysia?
It was not, but I have heard George Gann, who is an amazing leader in EO and has been around for a very long time.
Yeah.
I've heard George speak about that. It was actually a gentleman in my chapter, my previous chapter, EO Queensland, Nick Bloor. And Nick was running the mentoring program and running the training for mentoring program at the time. Nick is somebody, I would call an informal mentor in my life. And he was the first person that actually introduced me to the Shoshin mindset. I've heard it so many times since. It's a bit like when you mention a red car, you see red cars everywhere, but Nick was the first person that mentioned, and that was probably going back about 6 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, the two-word description I would say is it's a beginner's mindset, and then approaching every situation with a beginner's mindset, which might have originated from a different training to you, and I've found it really beneficial, and certainly the people that I've observed who've gone through it, the way that they adopt things has been quite different. So that's good. So tell me, why the title of the book, Getting Your People to Step Up? Like, I looked at it and I thought about it and I thought, it's a big challenge, right? We think they can do it. We hire it because we can, but there's something that's stopping them from stepping up. Tell us about what made you select that title, if anything?
Yeah, well, firstly, Brad, I found it quite challenging to get people to step up sometimes in my own businesses. And so it really started from that pain point of being an entrepreneur, hiring people that looked fantastic in their CV, and within 2 to 3 months then going, wow, this is not the person that I interviewed. How do I, I sometimes joke about it, and I joke about it in the book, that, it's like you're on your best behavior when you're on a date, and then all of a sudden you move in or get married and you're like, okay, this is not the same person.
Why did your incompetent twin turn up to work? Why didn't you send the twin that was competent that turned up to the interview?
Exactly, right? Because we obviously are in our best behaviours and we want to be hired in that role.
Yeah.
And so I struggled with that personally, thinking this person's got so much talent. What is it in me as a leader that's not able to take that talent up to that next level? Yeah. And I often remember asking myself that question, how do I get them to step up from this base or even underperforming, how do I get them to step up to that next level? So they were some of the questions that I had. And then as I started to interview some people in terms of the challenges that entrepreneurs and leaders have around their people, these words kept coming up. So it actually came from conversations with people which kind of affirmed the challenges I'd had. And I thought, okay, because I was actually going to make it around strategy and people and a couple of other things as the idea of the initial idea that I had around the book. But as I spoke to people, I realised that a lot of people talked about that their number one challenge was around people. But I think the subtitle is also really important because it's about, strategies that we need to attract, because a lot of people are saying, how do I find talent? And I don't mean from a HR recruitment sense just, but how do I also, when I've got really great people, how do I keep them? How do I retain them? And I think that's also a real challenge where when you've got those key people in your business, if one or two of them leave, not only is it very expensive to replace them, but it's a bit heartbreaking. Sometimes the reason that they've left are things that we could get better at as leaders and entrepreneurs and try and prevent a lot of them if we understood it. So really it was designed to help that pain point for entrepreneurs and leaders, who've all experienced losing good people.
Why do you think that mid-sized businesses struggle to keep their key talent?
Yeah, it's a really good question. There's probably lots of different ways, I think, of looking at that. First time, I think sometimes the mid-sized companies don't have great, or their branding is not as great. And so, I think it's so important to have employer branding where you've got a great proposition, depending on the type of demographic of the person that you're trying to hire. For example, when, younger people are much more attuned to looking at the values of the company, what they stand for, their why, a lot more. So I think that employer branding needs to be a lot more visible. And when we're particularly attracting top talent where they've got lots of opportunities to go to different places, why would they gravitate towards you and your business? And so what are the things that you can do that? Sometimes, and again, this might be a perception, is that sometimes mid-sized companies may not have as many opportunities. Yeah. So there might it might be a fairly flat structure. And compared to a bigger company, which might have a much more hierarchical structure. So people can see that, okay, they could grow those opportunities in terms of their career. That sometimes is not as visible when it comes to mid-size companies. And look, every company has resource constraints in terms of, what they can offer. Sometimes mid-size companies are not able to offer as much of that package or the remuneration or bonuses that individual might, be desiring. So they've got to really work, with what they've got and be able to do that. And this might not be an issue in terms of bringing people in, but certainly in terms of retention, I know in mid-sized companies has sometimes been that workload because we've got sometimes fewer people in there where you're trying to, as an entrepreneur and leader, grow that business and scale that business perhaps. And there's a lot of work to be done. And so sometimes, people in our teams can get a bit burnt out. So it's important to look at where they're productive, what sort of hours they're doing. And, my experience is when you've got a great employee and a great person in your team, as the saying goes, if you want something done, give it to a busy person. And so I've also seen leaders and entrepreneurs overload the really great people and the really great talent because they're the people that will get the job done. And so sometimes that can lead to burnout. Look, I'm sure that there's, many other reasons, but they're probably, some things that I think sometimes mid-sized firms can do a little bit better. And I think that if they got particularly some of that value proposition right, that attraction piece works better in terms of really letting people know what the benefits are if they got working for a medium-sized company rather than a large-sized company, for example.
I want to just double click on your first point there about employer branding. So one of the businesses that I started was a job board. And so we had the background insights into all of the jobs that were posted. We got to about 30,000 unique visitors per month before we sold it. But one job would have a dozen applicants to the job, and what seemed on the surface to be exactly the same job with exactly the same pay would have hundreds and hundreds of applicants, and it just made no sense on the surface of it, other than at the time it was employer branding, and it was anecdotal, but it was just shocking to see the behind the scenes numbers and just say, this is outrageous. How can this possibly be so? So I definitely support your first point there.
Yeah, it's so true, isn't it? You go, why is that? Or even the same company sometimes will have great responses to a particular ad and really, really poor other times. And you start to go, well, it's about the same time of the year, and what's really different about it? It's often the person that's written the ad, or they've actually got to the benefits of that person rather than the benefits to the company. And so, you know, particularly when we're wanting to get to the top talent, it's so important to make sure we are really careful about what we choose in terms of what people read in that first couple of paragraphs and why they want to come and work for you.
Yeah. So some businesses, to that point, see their people as assets, while other leaders view their people as liabilities. This is sort of something that I drew from the book. I've known a lot of entrepreneurs who dream of a business without employees, in actual fact. Tell us, if you can, about the mindset of, are your people an asset or a liability, and why it's so important as someone begins the journey to getting their people to step up.
Yeah, I wanted to kind of relate it from a financial perspective around assets and liabilities. And, you know, when you look at assets and liabilities, I mean, there's a couple of ways of looking at it. The first is the mindset of that particular person. And so the people that you see as your assets are often people that you trust, people that are engaged, people that have got that sense of value, and they value the team, they value the business, they value, you know, the income that they might be drawing from it. And they're generally pretty positive people. They, you know, doesn't mean that they're without challenges or they don't, or they absolutely accept everything, but they're coming from a place of wanting to make a difference. Yeah. But people that are liabilities are often that, you know, the opposite. They'll tend to be sometimes people that gossip or micromanage. They'll bring low morale into the team, and they're often pretty disengaged. So that disengagement impacts some of the individuals when, say, for example, they're sitting around a team, or worse, if they've got people reporting to them, and then it tends to cascade through the business because it becomes a very sort of toxic culture. I also think people that are your assets, you know, they're there to help you drive your business forward. You know, they might not be a partner or have any monetary things, but they really believe in what's happening, and so they actually want to drive your business forward. You know, I always think if you can find somebody that treats your business like it's their own, like you've struck gold, because you know, they're going to be amazing assets into their business. And we also know, you know, like negative people and people that gossip can be really contagious and become really toxic. I also think the opposite is true, that if you actually get some people that are positive and bring a really great mindset into it, they collaborate well, that's contagious too. Because, you know, people that are in the middle kind of watching this negative person or positive person, you know, hopefully we'll get a bit more inspired by the positive person in terms of what they do. So look, we can look at that obviously in terms of their performance, but often it links back to those couple of things, that when they've got those behaviours and that mindset around that, then it translates into the outcomes and their productivity as well. And they're just the outcomes as a result of them being an asset rather than what they just produce.
If you'll bear with me, let me replay that to you and then pick me up where I've got it wrong. So some people view their people as assets. Some people view their people as liabilities, or some leaders. That mindset can foster or can feed a compounding problem of a positive or a negative culture with high, low performance and toxicity, etc., resulting from that. The way to break that is as a cause effect to start is perhaps to, rather than viewing people as liabilities, view them as assets, and then begin to reframe how you're interacting with people and what's happening there. Have I interpreted that correctly?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the most common things we hear, Brad, when people are talking about their people, they say, you know, yes, we do this, this and this, or we make this and this, or we make this widget, but people are my best assets. We hear that all the time, right? But it's actually not true. People are not your best assets. Some people are your best assets, and some people are your liabilities. And so also when I hear that, we say, well, that's actually not a true statement. You know, some people are the ones, and they're the ones you want to spend more time conversing with, engaging with, loving, making sure that they're happy so we can actually retain the good ones. It's a bit like we talk about that with customers as well, right? The good customers are the ones that we want to hang on to.
Yeah.
And rather than always acquiring new and, you know, doing it for growth's sake. But some of your people are your liabilities, and they also need to be managed, and you need to have a strategy around what it is that you're going to do. And if somebody says, no, all of my people are amazing, unless you've got 3 people in your team and you think that's amazing, most mid-sized companies, as we've been speaking about, will have a mixture. And obviously we want a much higher percentage in our assets, but then we also need to have a strategy to manage those liabilities. And, you know, we want to have ideally A players everywhere we go. So we want to kind of manage these. There's sometimes not even B, sometimes there's C, D, E players, and then, you know, how do we manage them out of the business or get them performing to a better level?
Yeah. It's a real challenge, and what that made me think about was, if you think that you're 100% A players, it's the lie that you're telling yourself, maybe.
Yeah, it's true. And, you know, sometimes check it, because most of, you know, in my experience, most of the people that are A players don't talk about being an A player. They just get on with it.
Yeah.
They put their hand up for extra jobs. They come in a bit early. They stay a little bit later. They're not that demanding. They really listen. They take notes. They take action. You know, it's the ones that are going, yes, you know, I've identified Matt as the A player. You know, that's obviously one of the qualities around, you know, great leaders as well, is the humbleness. But usually they're not really talking about it. But I think that's a real challenge for entrepreneurs and leaders as well, because they're not the noisy employee, because they're not the person that's the squeaky wheel that's asking to be oiled. Sometimes we do forget about that unnoisy, highly productive, highly engaged A player. And one of the things I think we need to do is we need to be more conscious as entrepreneurs and leaders to give and devote more of our energy and time and resources into people that are the A players, who are not demanding it, because it's easy to forget about them sometimes, and the squeaky wheel takes up all of our diary and management of those people. So we do have to shift consciously our time more towards the other.
Yeah, we say you want to flip it. So you're spending 80% of your time with the people who aren't performing and 20% of your time with the people who are. You want to flip that, spend 80% of your time with the people who are performing, helping them to get better, and 20% of the people who, look, maybe they've got a chance of making it, but who aren't performing. You know, and it's not a hard and fast 80-20, but I agree with your point.
Yeah.
At any time, any employee can quit, right? It's the nightmare. I remember I worked my butt off for 8 months at one point, and I had junket for 4 days in the Pacific with one of our suppliers, and it was just go over there, learn some stuff, all this junket stuff, right? It was good fun. I'd worked my butt off. I went over there, got on the plane, went over there, as I'm walking into the first shop, an employee rang me up and said, this was a general manager of one of my businesses, said, oh, look, I just want to let you know that I've got another job. And I just felt like, couldn't you maybe tell me that when I got back? Like, couldn't you just... Anyway, any employee can quit at any time is the point, which puts enormous stress on the business owner and the leaders. So what you're doing is advocating succession planning for roles with a plan A, a plan B, and a plan C. Tell us about your thoughts and approach here, and how mid-sized business leaders can cost-effectively utilise this concept.
Yeah, absolutely. And I learned this, Brad, in such a painful way. I'd have a key manager that I, finally trained up, that were now running it similar to what I was as an owner of the business, and then they'd quit. And then I'd literally be curled up in a ball going, oh my God, I'm not a great leader, and there's something, terribly wrong in terms of how I'm actually doing some of that. So succession planning, I learned the hard way. And I think mid-sized companies having those, almost a pipeline.
Yeah.
And so plan B and plan C basically says, okay, well, if I've got somebody in a particular role, if they left suddenly, who's the person, who's plan B that would fit into that role? And then who's that plan C that would then come into plan B? Now, they're not ever going to be fully trained because that would be a very expensive exercise, is to have somebody be able to completely be trained in it. But could they 50, 60, 70% if that do that role? So how do we identify what I call, the high potential employees, and how do we do some of that cross training and some of that skill development? How do they also know that they're part of this particular pipeline? So, having conversations, I remember, with people, even at the recruitment process, saying, look, you're starting at this role, but this is what the system looks like. This is what some of the roles that you can apply for in the future look like. When we're having regular conversations, and I don't mean once a year, in terms of what their performance looks like, we're having that fairly regularly, ideally on a monthly basis, where you're talking about what's happened in the last sort of 30 days, talking about what's happening in the next 90 days, whatever you call that. Some people call that 30-90, other people call it different things, but essentially doing a review of the last 30 days and also the next 90 days and what you look like, but letting them know where they sort of fit in, what some of the roles that might be coming up. So knowing what that pipeline is, even getting mid-sized company and the leaders within it to say, okay, we'll just map out on a little Excel spreadsheet or a piece of paper for each of your key roles, not every role, but each of your key roles, who's your plan B, who's your plan C? And they might have question marks next to it. But even just doing that exercise, is a really great thing. The other, I think, is that in any size company, but particularly mid-sized companies, that we want to really systemise the processes. So some things might be systemised really well, but where does some of that knowledge sit that's sitting in somebody's head that we haven't actually transferred? So making sure that there's systems in place so that just in case somebody left, somebody could literally pick it up and go, okay, I don't quite know how to do this, but I have a process and I can try and work through that and, see where I land, around that as well. And I think the other thing is like having a culture where, we're talking about this plan B and C. We're talking about the skills and looking at what the training plans might be for people. Ideally, if you've got all your key skills that you want and you've got a matrix of all the different people in it, you want to tick across every single one. But even identifying, saying, 4 of my key team members don't have that skill, whether that's training on technology or training on a particular thing, and then having like a bit of a training matrix that talks about how it is that they can fulfill some of those gaps. So being really strategic about your succession planning is really important. And, there might still be a surprise, but there's no, going in a fetal position, rocking in the corner, because you've got some plans in place. You might still be really disappointed and a bit heartbroken, but you've at least got a plan in place where other people can step into it somewhat.
Yeah, cool. Yeah. So I love it. It connects really well with what Brad Smart from Top Grading calls the virtual bench. The best example I'd ever seen of that, there was a CEO that I worked with in the home building industry, and I was in his office and he pulled out his drawer, and inside there he had one of those old business card folders, and he said, I've got the business card of every salesperson in the industry in our state, and I've got them ranked and I know exactly what they're doing, because he knew that the fuel for his business was home sales people. So he needed to have the best A players coming on board. So I love the concept. The other concept that I love is what you call the 4-to-1 ratio. So you're talking about the importance of feedback and how people don't actually get enough feedback. So they sit there wondering, how am I doing? Why is feedback important? And can you please tell us about this 4-to-1 ratio?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, feedback's got a really bad name. It's got a really bad rap. And that's because when somebody sort of says, I'd like to give you feedback, the thing that goes through your head is, oh my God, what have I done? Just tell me what I've done wrong. And I think when feedback, if we could really shift the way that we look at that, whether we want to rename that or not, but really in this case, maybe just a couple of reasons of why you want to give positive feedback. And why you want to give feedback, because, it helps people grow. It helps people improve. When we give people regular feedback, informally, formally, it drives better engagement. And there's a lot of research that shows it actually drives retention, which is what we're trying to do here. We want to keep our key talent in the businesses that we do. So the 4-to-1 ratio originates from Stephen Covey, the Covey Institute, and it talks about that when we give people a lot more positive feedback than we do constructive feedback. And notice I didn't use the word negative. And so, when we give them constructive feedback, and we do this like that 4-to-1 ratio, 4 lots of timely, positive feedback, catching them doing something right. When they do something great, whether they put up a great idea or they stayed behind to do something, thanking them, giving them that feedback, one-on-one and perhaps even in a group, that builds their self-confidence, that builds their worthiness. So when it comes time to give that constructive feedback, then they're much more open to being able to receive it. They know that the person that's giving to them, whether it's their manager or their colleague, has done so many positive things in the past that they're going to be, really receptive to saying, please, tell me what that could have happened. And again, it's a skill, so you need to learn it and be trained in it in terms of how to give people really good feedback and how to give them constructive feedback. But when you learn that art of it, it's magical, because, all of a sudden people are welcoming feedback. They know what they're doing really well. They won't know what they need to improve a little bit. And they feel like that they're working in a team and a culture that really matters. I've seen it done really poorly, Brad, as I'm sure you have as well.
Oh, yeah.
And I've seen it done beautifully well. And then those teams and the outcomes of what they produce, the scalability, the culture that they produce, again, what we were talking about earlier, being able to attract other people, because it grows and people go, wow, I want to be part of that. I actually want to be part of that sort of business growing rather than something that's growing. But goodness, the culture's shocking. People are really negative around it. So that's kind of that. And I've got 2 teenagers, and I don't know, the ratio might be 8-to-1 at the moment. But, the idea is also building some of catching them doing something right, because you give them one bit of constructive feedback and they're not equipped yet to be able to look at that, and they're like, oh, Mum, you're telling me that all these things I'm doing wrong. I mean, I gave you like a 4-to-1 ratio, but the ratio is having to be shifted. And again, the idea is to shift the culture around that.
Yeah. And you want to normalize it, right? As a leader, the job to be done is to normalize your ability to give constructive feedback, positive feedback, whatever it is, just to simply flow off the tongue in a normal manner, to help the person understand and get better. So
absolutely.
I love it. On that point, it really leads us to coaching, right? Because in your book, you talk about this 4-question framework for managers to use to become a coach and to become more coach-like, which covers the reality of the situation, options, will, and goals. Can you tell us about why managers should consider being more coach-like? And maybe we just touched on it, but why should they consider being more coach-like, and how can they use this 4-part framework from your book?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's one of the most underused resources is teaching our managers how to become coaches. Yeah. We talk about having external coaches, very important, but training and teaching our managers to become coaches is so essential. The other thing I just wanted to say, Brad, that in that book, that model is not mine. And so I refer to it by Max Landsberg. It's probably the Tao of Coaching, which was one of the first books I read about coaching 20 plus years ago, really shifted that. And it sounded so simple, this framework. It's basically stands for GROW. So GROW, G is for goals, R is for reality, O is for options, and W is the will or the willingness to be able to do it. And I remember just reading that thinking, oh my goodness, surely complex conversations with people not everything can be applicable here using this particular model. And the more I practiced it, the more I realised we don't have to go, now we're on G, now we're on O. Just in conversation, it's amazing how you can, create that.
Yeah.
I had a conversation with my 16-year-old who was trying to work out who to take to the concert that she got some tickets for Christmas. And she said, I don't know who to take. And so I used the GROW model and saying, okay, so what are you trying to achieve here? I just want to go to a concert that a friend's invited me and I want to have a really, really great time. Right, great. Well, where are you at now? Well, I'm down to like these 2 or 3 people, but I'm not sure. Well, let's go through the pros and cons of the options. Well, she invited me to this concert, etc. Okay, so what are you going to do next? So even just that conversation, which sounds like a very free-flowing conversation, which was literally last week, that I had with my 16-year-old, it was really about bringing that into a conversation. And so whether you're a manager speaking to somebody about, a particular project that needs to be accelerated and you really want to coach them through that, the idea is you would help them clarify on their goals, look at where they're at, which is your reality, look at the options, and the willingness. Sometimes I'd even say things like, well, rate it out of 10. If 10's, you are hands down committed to this and you're willing to do it, which is the W, where are you sitting? Well, I'm sitting at 6. Well, why are you sitting at 6? What will it take to get to 7 or 8? So Max Landsberg and the framework, and we've seen this GROW model in many, many different texts, but he was the first person that I came across it, really helps. And, why do we want to apply it? Because it empowers people, right? It facilitates the problem solving. It helps people have clarity. It gets people committed in terms of what they need to be able to do. And you're also, when you get into the coaching mode, you're not then trying to fix the problem yourself as a manager. You're really teaching people accountability, you're teaching them, you're learning to get better at conversations, and then the actions actually sit with the person that you're coaching, not you as a manager going, I have to fix this and fix this and fix this as well.
Awesome. So at the moment I'm working on a book which is about bigger isn't better, but better is better. That's a bit of a mouthful.
That's great.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So it's about building a better business rather than seeking simply to scale for the purpose of scale. And so, for you, what is it? What do you think that a better business looks like?
For me, or generally?
Well, for you, how would you define a better business?
A better business for me, and we probably started our conversation talking about EO. And we started talking about Shoshin. And so to me, it's about, I'm not into growth for growth's sake. I come across people that might be running a business 10, 100, maybe 500 times the size of my business. And, 20 years ago, that would have been, oh my goodness, now I don't feel like I have a very big business, either in terms of revenue or whatever. But one of the things I've learned is, the more people I've spoken to, Brad, whether it's whatever hat that I might be wearing when I'm speaking to them, one of the things I've learned is that some businesses run extremely well. Like I've got somebody in the book who I interviewed who runs just over a $2 million business with about a 70% profit. And she has 5 people in a team. And I go, wow, that's a pretty cool business. So you're running a $2 million business with that sort of profit margins with less than 5 people. It's a pretty cool business. And so to me, I think, a great business or a better business for me is, what are my goals? So I've got like a 10-year goal, and I've got a 5-year goal and a 1-year goal, and then what I want to do in the next sort of, 3 months or by the end of this quarter. And so I just go, okay, and some of them have got nothing to do with money. Yeah. Some of them have got, how many days do I want to have? I've got, one child that's got 2 years at school, the other one another, 2 years on top of that. So one of my goals over the next 4 years, certainly the 5-year plan, is how many days I want to travel and how many days I'd like to be at home or be there for those crucial conversations. And so I think, however people measure their success, for me, I measure it, and I've learned that from EO, is that I want to, measure it in terms of growth of my business, but it needs to be growth in areas I love. And it can't just be growth for growth's sake, but I also want to have space and time for my family. But also there are some things that I'm very passionate about in terms of some of the volunteer work I do. I'm really passionate about educating girls in third world countries. And so the idea is to also have some spaces in my diary that are allocated, once a month, where I've got some time to be able to contribute into some of those other passions that I have in my life. So I'm not sure I've directly answered your question, but I have different measures, I guess, of that. So to me, a better business is also got to couple with better family and better personal. But a better business is, I know for the next 12 months, I'm probably letting go of about more than half, maybe even 60% of some of the things I experimented with last year.
Yeah.
And so they were experiments, and I thought, wow, let's just experiment with a bunch of things. And some things I enjoyed and didn't work. And some things I enjoyed, and worked. And vice versa. So I'm going, okay, what are the bits I really enjoyed and worked? And so I'd like to go deeper into fewer things this year and probably for the next 5 to 10 years, and be doing them narrower and deeper rather than wider and shallower. So that's probably one of my business goals over the next few years. And if I can do that well and do it being happy and healthy and having time with my husband and my kids, and doing what I love, then I've struck gold.
I think art is in the eye of the beholder. You've answered it relative to your context and situation, which is great. There is no wrong answer necessarily, but the book is aimed at mid-market owner-led companies, okay, which and I really begin by talking about the difference between a corporation and a company, okay? And we learn so much from what works in corporations, but we're on a different path. I don't want to go too far into there and into that. So is there a book on that topic then that you would recommend for our audience?
I really love reading, and there are so many books that have impacted things. The one that comes to mind that really had a significant shift, and it actually got me working on some personal things, but then it had a very big impact on my business, was James Clear, Atomic Habits. And, a couple of the changes that I made, were when he talked about the fact that if you want to exercise, like I would exercise sporadically. And when I say, sporadically, I would do it 2 to 3 times a week, and I'd go, yes, you've done a great job. And he talked about the fact that you need to, change something atomic, like it's an atomic habit. It's a small thing, the size of an atom, that then starts to lead that. And one of those things I learned from that book was having your exercise gear next to when you wake up. And so now what I do is I do that every single morning. And I'm not sure you can see, but I've actually got my Nike shirt on here.
Yes.
And the reason I've got the Nike shirt on is because I haven't been for my exercise, and I've been wearing it for the last few hours. And that atomic habit shifted because it was like, whatever you do, you've got to exercise for 45 minutes that day.
Awesome.
And
I love
whether
it.
you rock up in a podcast and a Nike shirt and a red jacket or whatever it is. And that thing, by doing that, has given me so much more energy and better mindset, and not compromising on that, which has had a massive impact in business.
Oh, that's so good to hear. Okay, Atomic Habits by James Clear was the book. We'll put the link in the show notes. How can people learn more about you and your business?
Probably a couple of places. The best place to find me is the website askshivani.com. We're just launching a new business around strategy and people, which is called Passion Institute. That link will be on the Ask Shivani website or LinkedIn. And on LinkedIn, it's Ask Shivani, and then soon it'll be Passion Institute as well.
Beautiful, thank you. What haven't we discussed that you wanted to cover off today?
That is such a good question. What haven't we discussed? One of the things I would love when, if you're listening to this or watching this and you're that mid-sized company and you're a leader and entrepreneur in that business, is to really start doing a bit of a time audit of how you're spending your time managing your people, who you're managing. We talked about the 80-20, right? How many of them are A players and amazing and how many are not. How much time you're spending on some operational stuff versus strategy stuff. Like, really just do a time audit over a week, either look at your diary and just do a little bit of an audit of that. I try and do that once a quarter, if not more than that. And I'm always like, how did that creep in? How did that go? Which bit's got to go out? Why am I having that meeting every week? So just, that is such an important thing. So it's not about doing more and more hours particularly in those mid-sized companies that have got so much to do. You're trying to come up with new ideas, you're trying to scale and grow, you've got a gazillion things on your to-do list, but really keep going back and reviewing what you've got and getting rid of things out of your diary that don't belong there on a regular basis.
Awesome. A time audit. Take the time, review where you're at. Love it. Shivani, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, and I guess as well taking the time to write the book. It's no small undertaking. It's been great to chat to you today. Thank you so much again for sharing your wisdom and taking the time out with us today.
Thanks so much, Brad. Thanks for having me.
Well, I hope you enjoyed the episode as much as I did. If you'd be kind enough to leave a review for the podcast, that'd be really helpful to other like-minded entrepreneurs, and then we can grow our community. If you want to find out more about our guests, head over to evolutionpartners.com.au/podcast, where you can find show notes and other additional reading. Hope to see you back next week. Until then, keep thriving.